dropping of Russia's reference to Russia's aggression against Ukraine. What's your sense? What is the response as far as the Ukrainian people are concerned on the G20 New Delhi Declaration?
Ukraine has already stated that they are disappointed, and this just does not go far enough in the language. And even if you contrast it to the Bali summit, the language was much stronger there. However, looking at it, putting aside the fact that I'm a Ukrainian and I have my personal perspective and viewpoints, looking at it, this was the issue going into the summit and determining how the world saw India's stewardship of G20. And India was in a very, very difficult position. You have a very divided G20. You have Russia and China on one side that wanted to altogether avoid the discussion on Ukraine. And then you have Western nations that really want to condemn Russia, which creates a really, really difficult position. And I will tell you that even me going into this did not think that India would be able to forge any kind of consensus on Ukraine. But in this sense, we were wrong. And Delhi certainly managed to get a joint declaration. Certainly this, in order to have, Russia on board, there was a significant compromise when it came to language, and the criticism was significantly toned down, which as a Ukrainian, of course, I find disappointing, especially contrasting to other summits. But the fact that India was able to deliver this and Prime Minister Modi was able to deliver this, I think speaks volumes to his leadership. And I think it really elevates India in a really big way coming out of the summit.
We've talked about this, the declaration. What your views on no direct condemnation, because you are a Ukrainian citizen, and I'm sure you feel differently. But in the larger interest, there have been mentions about this is not an era of war, no to nuclear war. All of these, and respecting the UN Charter and sovereignty of nations, all of these fine mentions. But for the greater good, there is the voice of the global south that had to be expressed, and perhaps G20 was the forum. And this gives confidence that this forum can look after the interests of the whole world instead of just its own interests.
Again, I think that the fact that, some sort of consensus was reached, is positive for the way that India comes out of its stewardship over G20. But I will say that, the fact of the matter is that the Delhi Declaration does not directly criticize Russia for the war. It talks about human suffering. It talks about negative added impacts of the war in Ukraine. It talks about, global food security and energy security. But there's things where it misses. It talks about the war in Ukraine rather than the war against Ukraine. I do agree that, the fact that, nuclear arsenals is mentioned in there is strong and helps. But, overall, there's some shortfalls. It's very important to note that most members, strongly condemn the war in Ukraine and have all stressed that it's causing immense human suffering, exacerbating, existing fragilities in the global economy, constraining growth, increasing inflation, the list goes on, disrupting supply chains, you name it. So I think that it's really important to note that most members strongly condemn this war. And but it's very difficult when you have polarizing forces like Russia and China, and it's very difficult to come to a consensus. So again, I think that the fact that, Prime Minister Modi was able, to come out with this consensus, to come out with the Delhi Declaration, I think while it falls short, it certainly is not something per se that, I expected coming out of this. And so for India, as I said, it's a win. For Ukraine, I do not think it's a win. I think Russia, is quite happy in the sense that it's not directly referenced, that Russian aggression is not referenced. These are exactly the things that they would not support. And, I'm sure they're happy in some degree. But overall, it's a win for India coming out of this.